world is held in a soft, velvet silence as the stars begin to fade into the hazy gray of a coming dawn. And inside the small stone workshop of the perfumer, the air is perfectly still and heavy with a beautiful peace. A single small candle casts a dim, rhythmic orange glow against the high, arched walls and the rows of delicate glass bottles, creating a space that is perfectly safe, perfectly warm, and entirely still. The air is thick with the comforting, heavy scent of dried flowers, sweet resins, and the faint, earthy aroma of precious oils, all lingering in the quiet room like a soft, invisible blanket. You are invited now to let your own breath slow down to match the steady, peaceful beat of this ancient room, and to drift away into the gentle, repetitive motions of a day built of scent and soft, golden light. Let the silence wrap around you as you prepare to rest. Chapter 1. Quietly, the perfumer moves within the soft shadows of his sleeping chamber as the world outside remains tucked away in a dream. His fingers brushing against the cool linen of his tunic as he prepares for the silent work ahead. He rises from his bed with a slow and fluid ease, feeling the solid, familiar texture of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. And he listens for a moment to the profound silence of the house, a stillness that feels like a physical presence, pressing gently and kindly against his skin. He dresses in the dim, gray light of the pre-dawn hour, his movements rhythmic and steady, and he finds a comfort in the simple repetition of his morning ritual, a sequence of events that has remained unchanged for 1,000 days. He makes his way down the stone stairs, his leather boots making a soft, muffled thud on each step. And as he enters the workshop, the air greets him with a faint, sweet whisper of the flowers and resins that live there. The room is cool and smells of the damp earth and the ancient stone, but it soon begins to warm as he strikes a small flint, watching the tiny sparks dance for a brief moment before the wick of a single candle catches the flame. A soft, golden circle of light begins to bloom around him, pushing back the dark with a kind and steady glow. And he watches the flame for a long minute, his own breathing slowing down to match the slow, rhythmic pulse of the fire. He begins his first task of the morning, which is the slow and methodical preparation of the glass vials, each one a small and delicate vessel that has been blown into a shape of perfect clarity. He reaches for a large wooden tray where the bottles are kept, feeling the cold, smooth surface of the glass against his calloused palms, and he begins to lay them out in a neat and orderly line on the long cedar workbench. One by one, he checks each vial for any dust or imperfections, holding them up to the candlelight so that the glass catches the orange glow and turns into a small, shimmering jewel in his hand. He places them down with a quiet, final precision, the sound of glass meeting wood being a tiny, musical tink that echoes softly through the silence of the room. Once the bottles are ready, he turns to the drawers that line the far wall, each one filled with the dried treasures of the garden and the distant woods. He pulls open a drawer made of dark oak, and the scent of dried rose petals spills out, a rich and nostalgic aroma that fills his senses and settles his mind into a state of deep, quiet focus. He takes a small wooden scoop and begins to move the petals from the drawer to a ceramic bowl, a slow and repetitive motion that requires no thought at all, just the steady rise and fall of his arm. Scoop, lift, pour. Scoop, lift, pour. And with every movement, the petals make a soft, rustling sound that is like the whisper of the tide against a sandy shore. He repeats this many times, his mind drifting into a state of quiet meditation, where the only reality is the texture of the dried flowers and the rhythmic sound of his own breathing. He gathers the lavender and the sprigs of dried rosemary next, feeling the brittleness of the stems and the dusty softness of the blossoms, and he lays them out in small, fragrant piles on the table. The air in the workshop is beginning to brighten as the first hint of gold filters through the narrow window, casting long and soft shadows that stretch across the floor to touch the far corners, where the large copper vats and the empty jars wait in their own patient silence. He feels the coolness of the morning air on his face and the warmth of his own steady breath, a perfect balance of sensations that makes him feel grounded and safe, anchored in a moment of time that belongs only to him and the quiet preparations of his craft. He moves to the shelf to fetch the precious oils, the small jars of almond and olive oil that will carry the scent of the herbs into the world. And he feels the weight of the ceramic in his hand, a solid and reliable presence. He is ready now. The workshop is ready, and the day is unfolding exactly as it should, one slow and gentle movement at a time, while the stars remain hidden but near in the growing light of the sky. Chapter 2. As the morning deepens and the light turns to a rich, golden honey that fills the small stone workshop, the perfumer begins the long and meditative process of blending the scents, his hands moving with a relaxed and steady strength that feels like the turning of a great, silent wheel. He takes up a heavy stone mortar carved from a single piece of dark granite, and he places a handful of the dried lavender and a few pieces of resin into the center, feeling the weight of the stone pestle as he prepares to grind the elements together. He begins to move the pestle in a slow, circular motion, pressing down with a firm but gentle pressure that makes a low, rhythmic scratching sound against the stone. Press, swirl, lift. Press, swirl, lift. And he finds himself lost in the sensation, his mind becoming a blank and peaceful slate, The dried herbs begin to break apart, releasing their oils and their essence into the air, and the scent becomes immediate and profound. A wave of floral sweetness and earthy spice that settles his heart and makes his breathing even deeper and slower than before. He watches the way the colors change as the herbs are crushed. The pale purple of the lavender mixing with the amber of the resin to create a soft, fragrant powder that coats the sides of the mortar in a layer of pale gold. He pauses for a long minute just to breathe in the aroma. His eyes half closed as he follows the complexity of the scent, identifying the tiny notes of citrus and wood and honey that hide within the blend. Next, he takes a small glass funnel and places it into the neck of a vial, and he begins to pour the clear oil from a large pitcher, a slow and steady stream that makes a low, trickling melody as it fills the glass. He adds the ground herbs to the oil, watching as the tiny particles swirl in the liquid like golden stars in a dark sky. And he uses a thin wooden stick to stir the mixture, moving it in slow, wide circles that churn the oil into a fragrant and healing potion. Round and round he goes, the motion starting in his wrist and flowing through his fingers, a hypnotic cycle that feels like the swaying of tall grass in a summer breeze. And he feels the connection between his own body and the living essence of the plants. The warmth from the window wraps around him like a heavy wool blanket, making his limbs feel loose and relaxed, even as he works. And the only sound in the world is the soft, wet sloshing of the oil and the rhythmic creak of his leather boots on the stone floor. He does not rush the mixing, for the scents cannot be hurried, and so he embraces the slowness, letting the repetition wash over him like a gentle tide that pulls away all his worries and leaves only the peace of the workshop. He takes a small piece of parchment and dips it into the vial, then holds it to his nose, closing his eyes to fully experience the new creation, feeling the way the scent fills his head and calms his spirit. He repeats this process for dozens of bottles, each one a different combination of the garden's treasures, his hand never wavering and his mind never rushing, for he knows that beauty grows best in the silence. The room feels like a sanctuary, a place where the clocks of the world have stopped, and the only measure of time is the slow, invisible change of the oil into a finished perfume, and the slow turning of the sun across the wooden floorboards. He feels a deep and humming peace that radiates out from his chest to his very fingertips as the hours pass in a blur of quiet productivity, and he finds a quiet joy in the order and the beauty he is creating, one slow drop at a time. He watches a small spider spinning a web in the corner of a shelf, its movements as slow and deliberate as his own, and he feels a kinship with every quiet creature that moves through the world with purpose and grace. The light light in the workshop is changing now, the bright yellow of noon turning into a soft and rich amber, and the dust motes in the air dance in the thick beams of light, moving in slow and lazy spirals that mirror his own repetitive movements. He is content to stay in this one spot for as long as the scents require, a guardian of the blossoms who finds his greatest joy in the simple act of being present and still. And as he finishes the last blend, he feels a profound sense of gratitude for the quiet life he leads, for the flowers that bloom and the oils that hold, and the silence that listens. Chapter 3. The velvet curtain of twilight begins to descend over the village as the afternoon sun begins its long and lazy slide toward the horizon, and the perfumer feels a gentle, sleepy fatigue beginning to settle into his bones, a warm and pleasant tiredness that tells him the work of the day is done. He begins the final, quiet tasks of the evening with a body that feels heavy and pleasantly relaxed, moving through the workshop one last time to gather his jars and return them to their proper places on the high stone shelves. He cleans his mortar and pestle with a soft scrap of linen and a bit of clear water, wiping away the traces of herb and oil until the stone is bright and gray once more, and he places them carefully in their wooden chest, hearing the small, final click of wood against wood in the quiet room. He gathers the finished perfume bottles, the small glass vessels feeling cool and solid in his arms, and he slides them into their protective wooden slots, each one making a soft, muffled sound as it finds its home in the darkness. He stands for a moment in the center of the room, looking at the empty workbench where the day's labor began, seeing the way the shadows have grown long and soft across the floor, and he feels a sense of completion that is as deep and quiet as the sea. The air is growing cooler now, carrying the scent of the night air and the first hints of the evening mist that rolls in from the valley below, and the perfumer breathes it in with a sense of peace, feeling the weight of the day falling away as the world prepares to sleep. He walks slowly toward the small table where his evening meal is waiting, the light from a single candle looking pale and yellow against the growing gray of the room, and he eats in a state of quiet meditation, his thoughts already beginning to drift toward the softness of his bed. He moves to the candle, extinguishing the flame with a slow and deliberate motion of his fingers, watching the tiny curl of smoke rise into the air and disappear into the darkness, leaving only the silver light of the moon to guide his way back to his chamber. The smell of the extinguished wick is a smoky, nostalgic scent that signals the end of the journey, and he breathes it in with a sense of completion and peace, his body feeling delightfully tired, a warm sensation that starts in his feet and moves all the way up to his shoulders. He undresses with slow and practiced movements, laying his tunic across a wooden stool and feeling the lightness of his body as he steps into the cool, dark space of his bed, where the blankets are waiting for him like a warm embrace. He climbs into the bed, the linen sheets feeling cool and crisp at first, but quickly warming to the heat of his body as he pulls the thick wool blankets up to his chin, tucking them in around his shoulders until he is encased in a cocoon of warmth and safety. He lies there for a moment with his eyes open, looking at the dim outlines of the room, the familiar shapes of the jars and the workbench, and the tall stacks of herbs, all resting in the quiet dark. His muscles feel loose and heavy, every tension of the day melting away into the soft mattress, and he lets his head sink into the pillow, his thoughts slowing down until they are nothing more than the gentle pulse of his own heartbeat. The silence of the workshop is total, a deep and liquid quiet that fills his ears and his heart, and he knows that the oils are set, the bottles are still, and the world is exactly as it should be, safe and still under the watch of the moon. He closes his eyes and breathes in the faint scent of lavender that lingers on his fingers, and as the house settles around him with a final, gentle sigh, he drifts off into a sleep that is as deep and nourishing as the scents he has spent his day blending. He feels the house around him, a sturdy shell of stone and timber, protecting him from the wind and the night, and he sinks further into the softness of the bed, his breath becoming a slow, rhythmic wave that carries him away. The world is far away now, a distant and hazy place that has no power over the stillness of his room, and he is a part of the night, a part of the flowers, and a part of the peace that remains when the candle is out. Sleep now. Sleep. Sleep.